Thanks for joining me on the Peace and Parenting podcast. I'm so glad you're here. Thanks for joining me on the Peace and Parenting podcast. I'm Michelle, and I'd like to read a review from Apple. Very insightful and practical. Thanks, Michelle, for the great examples you use. I sometimes write the exact words you use or your examples so I can look back and use them with my kids. Your tips are on strong-willed, sensitive kids are especially appreciated. It's very challenging to navigate parenting of these kids. I understand deeply. Thank you for leaving this. Our strong-willed, sensitive, sweet kids are not easy. They really aren't, and they need special treatment. They really do. And that treatment really includes a lot of connection. So if you have a strong-willed, sensitive child, please don't use punishments and threats and bribes and rewards. Really dive into connection. It is going to take you much farther in your journey. All right, I want to talk about a sweet, strong-willed kid and a client that I had. So I had a client a couple of years ago who came to me. They had a 1-year-old and a 3-year-old, and both girls. And one of them was very strong-willed and one of them was much more agreeable, quote unquote. And I could relate very deeply with this sweet couple who both came from very strict families, very traditional families where spanking and yelling and shaming and guilt was used a lot. And so um, I could empathize in that way too. I came from that kind of family. So they came and said, we've tried everything. We've tried everything with this older daughter of ours. And she is continuing to bite, push, kick, and hit her little sister. They tried asking her kindly, no, you can't hit or bite or kick. We can't do that. Look at your sister. That really hurt her. We can't do those things. That didn't work. So then they started to amp it up a little. Okay, well, if you do that, you're going to have to go to timeout. And the little girl, of course, wouldn't stay in timeout and would scream during timeout and wouldn't have timeout. And it only exacerbated the biting and hitting and kicking. Then they started taking things away from her favorite toys, her favorite stuffed animals. They started putting them away so that she couldn't have them. That only made her more angry and upset. It did not curtail the hitting or kicking or biting at all. And in their minds, they're like, well, we have to get stricter. We have to get stronger. We have to get meaner. We have to impose more, painful, punitive measures in order to get this kid to do what we want her to do. And so they kept amping it up. Then they ended up yelling at her every time she did it, scaring her, yelling at her to scare her to get her to stop. And that kind of worked. But they started to feel bad. And then all that was going on in their house was yelling. So then they unraveled it a little bit and they started to do rewards. Can we give you a treat? Can we give you, if you get 5 stars in this week, you can buy something special at the store. We can give you a goodie. And that they said that worked for a little while. For a little while, she was really into it. She really wanted to get the goodie. She really wanted to go to the store. She wanted to get the stars. And then after a while, it stopped working. And she went back to hitting and biting and kicking. And she was constantly all over her sister. I mean, hands on her sister, in her sister's face, all over her sister. And the mom and dad were pulling them apart, yelling at the little girl, telling her how horrible she was and that she was doing this horrible thing to her daughter, really protecting the little baby because they didn't want the baby to be hurt. And they were in a really tough spot. And so I came in and tried to help them. And they worked with me for several months. On the first few sessions, it was all about, establishing what is connection and how do we use connection and why connection is important, and really starting to try to implement some pieces of connection. But they were still threatening and bribing and yelling, and all this was still going on. So the connection was kind of like, it was working, but it wasn't really working because we had to address that whole other side. But it takes a minute, right? It really does take a minute. It took a minute for us to get in there and see it all and understand it all, and then use the tools and apply it. So they started doing special time. And then the next week after we met, I said, okay, Why don't you stop using threats and bribes? Well, what can we do? She's going to hit and kick her sister. I was like, well, but she's already hitting and kicking her sister, right? The threats and bribes aren't making her not hit, and neither is the yelling. So how do we stop the yelling? Get in the middle of between the sisters when you see it happening. Get your body physically in the middle. Give a hug to the kid who's hitting, who's always the older child. Can you get some connection going with her? And let's try that. Let's just try that one baby step. So we tried that piece, and that started working. She started feeling better because she wasn't being threatened. She wasn't being bribed. She was being hugged. And then they came with all their objections, but we're going to reinforce the bad behavior. And we're not protecting the baby. The baby is not being protected. And I tried to talk to them about, well, are the threats and bribes protecting the baby? Because it's making the older child's behavior worse. Is the timeout protecting the baby? Because it's creating more angst in the family. Is the yelling correcting the baby? Because what's the baby learning? The baby's learning that yelling, you yell at people when you want to get what you need. The baby's also learning that the older child is wrong and that they're bad and that they need to be sent away in timeout because they need to be separated because they can't handle themselves. Does it cause resentment? Is it creating this victim villain scenario where the older one is always the villain and the younger one is always the victim? And is the baby being protected at all costs? And is that doing the baby any good? And what are we setting up in our sibling relationship here? That you're always going to intervene, that you're always going to be the protector, that you're always going to figure it out, that you're always going to be you're going to give the fix and the solution. And it's usually going to be with some sort of punishment and punitive measures. And so now, is it going to create tattletaling? Is it going to create a position where the baby she cannot navigate her own upset with her older sister? Lots of things going on in here that I think we don't really think about when we're just like, I need this violence. And we call it violence, even though I really believe it's aggression. I need it to stop because this cannot happen in my house. That is where I draw the line. I am intolerant of aggression. I get it. Who isn't? Nobody wants aggression. Nobody wants their older child to hurt their younger child. It's just a matter of, how do you go about it? How do you fix it? There's also research out there that one of my clients just told me about that says when you intervene in the sibling fights, if you intervene too much, it makes things worse. And I was really curious about this research because I was thinking, well, yeah, if you intervene too much and those interventions are punitive, that makes complete sense because every time you're intervening, you're telling someone they're wrong, you're correcting them. And will that really weigh on that person so that it almost fuels the fighting, the sibling fights? So if we think about it only as I'm not protecting the baby and I'm promoting this relationship, instead of zooming out a bit, letting go of those old ideals and saying, okay, I need to get this older child feeling better because this older child is taking out their angst, their anxiety, their stress, their upset, their whatever. They're taking it out on their baby sister. Now, sibling rivalry will always happen. But it's a matter of, are we exacerbating it or are we trying to curtail it? And I think we believe that when we intervene with punishment or correction, that we are in essence trying to get rid of it. But I think what happens is just the opposite, that it makes it worse. So connection is your friend. This older girl needed connection. So they started pouring in deeply with the special time. They started intervening with just their bodies and coming with the hugs. And guess what? They saw tiniest bit of progress. And because she was only 3, the progress comes real quick. And so I was like, okay, that's all we need. We saw the progress. We know it can be there. So we move forward. So then it was all a matter of taking out all the shaming verbiage, right? Look what you did to your sister. We can't allow hitting in this house. You're being aggressive. I have to protect her. We could take out all the shaming language. Just use our body as the limit And if we can come with more connection to this child and not use the threats or the bribes or the timeouts, everything started to move, and it moved real quickly. And really quickly, we realized that that older girl just needed connection. And sure, she still had some upsets with her sister, but 3-4 weeks from then, there was no more biting. There was no more kicking or hitting. There was no more aggression from that older child because she was feeling more connected and she was feeling less shame. And she was that strong willed, highly sensitive child who was probably shame adverse. And so when anything felt the tiniest bit shamey at all, she internalized it, just like my sweet Ez. And it came out in aggression because that's her temperament. It wasn't that she was a violent kid. It's that she couldn't manage the feelings of shame inside her body, and they came out with hitting and biting and kicking. And all we needed to do was get more connected to that older kid. And getting more connected to that older kid is way more protective than correcting the older kid, than telling them you can't treat your sister like this. That is not acceptable. We don't accept violence in our house, et cetera, et cetera. That wasn't protecting the baby, actually. It was putting her in harm's way because we were fueling the fire for the older one. And when we were fueling the fire for the older one, the baby is in harm's way even more because there's more ammunition. And our relationship with the oldest is playing out in the relationship that the youngest, that the kids had, right? She was taking out, the oldest one was taking out her aggression and upset around from the parents' correction on her sister. So it doesn't protect them is what I'm trying to say. And where we think we're really protecting them, or we're not protecting them if we don't correct or we don't address or we don't give a punishment or a consequence, we feel like we're not addressing it, we're not calling it out, and that we're leaving the baby to be unprotected. But it's just the opposite. It's so strange how it works. It really is. And so when we can get one feeling better, they just do better, right? When my relationship is more bonded with Esme, she does better with her sister. Same with Pia. When my relationship is better with Pia, she does better with her sister. So you have to get your parent-child relationship really juiced up, really feeling good. And then they don't have any angst to take out on their siblings, right? And they're more connected to their prefrontal cortex and they're doing better and they're feeling better. And so all their relationships in their life do better. But the sibling relationship is a safe relationship to take out feelings because they know that person has to be with you. They're going to love you no matter what. They're going to be by your side. Even if you hit them or bite them or kick them, your little sister's still going to love you. And so you're safe to have your feelings there. What we want is the kids to have their feelings with us so that they don't have to feel like they can have it with their siblings. And that was the other piece of it. The parents were shutting down the feelings, right? There was no empathy. There was no listening to the tantrums. And so all the other angst that this older child was having, going to preschool for the first time, mom was working, dad was working, she was having big feelings around it. They weren't being expressed. They were being shut down. And so that was another thing she could take out on her sister when we started to listen to the big feelings, when she started to really understand that she had a place to have them. And when the parents could be that place, she also started to be kinder and nicer and more connected and feel better. That's why all the tools have to work together in order to be successful in this method. You have to look at the big picture and all the moving pieces. And sometimes you can't see those moving pieces because you're too busy just trying to get the hitting to stop. And I get it. It's hard. And we don't want to see our babies hit one another. We don't want to see biting and kicking. It's horrible. It feels bad. And we go into fight, flight, or freeze. And then we don't know what to do. And then we end up yelling, even though we don't want to yell, even though we said, I don't want to be the home that yells. But we don't know what else to do because we just need it to stop, because aggression can't be in our homes because we came from aggressive homes and we don't want it to feel like that. And then we end up doing stuff we regret. Sometimes we need help. Sometimes we need support. Sometimes we need a coach who's watching the game, who says, shoot, I've seen this before. I know this play. They're not going to trick us this time. We won't let society dupe us. Here, look at it this way. And that's what parent coaching is about. I coach people every day. I have coaches that coach people every day. And right now I'm helping people become coaches. It's so beautiful. We all need this support. We have our group coaching program, which is incredible too. So if you feel like you have blind spots and you don't know how to unravel and you have things happening in your house that are hard and you just say, well, I just need help with the hitting. Yes, you do. But that hitting is a mushroom that keeps growing and it's many issues happening in that hitting or in that defiance or in that bedwetting or in that curfew breaking. There's lots happening that we can scratch through and dig through and unravel. So if you're interested in joining our group coaching programs or our one-on-one coaching programs, please do sign up for one of those programs or email us and we will get a meeting with you to help you understand how all of those work, because I want to help you see those blind spots, and so do my coaches. So thank you for joining me on the Peace and Parenting podcast. Take a look at the show notes and I'll see you next time.